Hey peeps, my name's Sydney,
Hey, I'm Hollis.
and welcome to today's virtual cooking class. Today we're going to be talking about the fun, beautiful little living critters that live on your food, help your body, and make things have different taste to them. And you might be wondering what I'm talking about, and I'm talking about fermentation. All those exactly, all those bacteria good guys doing you some justice.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about a few different forms of fermentation today, which is exciting. This is one of my favorite topics, and how it's a great way to use up some, produce or other things you got around the house that maybe aren't looking so hot, but you can transform them into something tasty and keep them good for longer. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
You don't know what fermentation is, and that's kind of a funny, long word for you. Fermentation's a big way of saying basically like introducing these little small bacteria that are good into your food. They eat all the natural sugars, so like the parts that make fruits and veggies sweet, and they turn them into lactic acid, which is a natural preservative. So it kind of takes the food from being something you might see like on the shelf, grocery store, at the farmer's market, and then turns it into this nice, kind of hang out in the fridge for several weeks, couple of months, really long period of time. Beautiful preserved goodness. Yeah, so it's like lactobacillus. And so you might see lacto ferment, but the good bacteria that help your body are generally in this lactobacillus family. So those are the good guy converters, and they can survive salt, and lots of bad bacteria cannot. So that's why a lot of fermentation and like leaving things sitting on the counter for a long period of time, which normally sounds kind of weird, like that's why it's all good. Good
Yeah,
for your body.
you just got to create the conditions for the good bacteria to thrive and not the bad bacteria. So, yeah.
So tell us a little bit more, Hollis. You're saying that this is one of your favorite topics. You seem really passionate about it. Why do you like fermentation? Like, what's the point? Why do you like fermented foods? Give us a little insight.
I think I like fermented foods because they are very like characteristic of the environment that you create them in. So like a lot of them will like pull yeast or other things from the environment and then incorporate that into the food. So like the sourdough starter that I have here actually was gifted to me by my sister who lives in Virginia, and her friend is a big baker, and he dehydrated a bunch of his sourdough starter, and it was a Christmas present to me like a year and a half ago. And so I've kept this particular culture going, and I've gifted it to other friends. And so I think that's a really cool like connection piece between like the bread that we make with this sourdough starter, for example, and like the bread that they make down in Virginia. So it's like this nice, yeah, like fun, like, connection. And then like, different fermentation that you would do. It just like it connects you to like that time and that space, and that whatever you put into it at that point in time, it kind of preserves that that kind of condition that you created it in. So I think that's pretty cool about it. And then also something that I love about it is that it's also like really increases like the nutritional content of your food, and like kind of the good bacteria like pre-digest it so that like your stomach and your body can like get the most out of that food. So those are like two of the reasons that I really like it. And I just think that the foods are like really tasty. So yeah.
So if you like have ever gotten sick, maybe you had a sinus infection, maybe you had bronchitis, they give you antibiotics.
Mm-hmm.
Those kill the bad bacteria, but I've read that the good bacteria in fermented foods can kind of help to heal your stomach. So sometimes if you get like your stomach's really upset when you take antibiotics, it's because those antibiotics kill all of the like good biotic things.
Yeah, they kill all the bacteria in your stomach. So
yeah,
the good and the bad.
Make it very sad, and it's like hard for your body to process food. But so creating more good bacteria, it can also help to keep you healthier because then it lowers the pH in your intestines. And so then bad bacteria have a harder time living there. So it like has a lot of health benefits.
Yeah.
So you should really check it out. If you like sauerkraut in your hot dog, sauerkraut's also fermented. So fermented's a long word, but you've probably been eating fermented foods for a while. So
yeah. And there's a lot of foods that are fermented that people don't really realize that they're fermented, like chocolate is fermented. So, that's not one that I've ever fermented myself at home, but like a lot of really tasty foods that we eat all the time are actually fermented foods. So
speaking of tasty fermented foods, like maybe we should do a little tour de ferment over here, like tour de France, but with food.
All right, so a few of the things we're going to talk about today are, like I mentioned, the sourdough starter. So this is basically just flour and water, but it has the yummy, good yeast and good bacteria and stuff in there. And so it makes this like really bubbly, thick substance that you would use rather than putting like, processed yeast, or not processed yeast, but like, like jarred yeast that you would buy at the store to make your bread rise. This makes it rise like naturally and by like digesting the grains in the flour that you're using to make your bread. And then another one is kimchi. So this is some kimchi that we made, or that our roommate made a couple weeks ago. And so that one's really pretty. It was done with red cabbage. That's why it is this beautiful color. So kimchi, sourdough, and then this looks kind of wild and funky, but this is for making kombucha. This is called a SCOBY. And so this is what you would put in like a black tea or something. We'll go into it a little bit more, but we're going to talk about kombucha, which is made with a SCOBY. And then we're also going to talk about ginger beer, which isn't actually an alcoholic drink. It's just like a soda, but that's made with like a ginger bug. So this is our ginger bug, and it's like chopped up, grated up ginger in a sugar solution. So yeah, those are the four we're going to talk about today. Okay, cool. Yeah. So, do we want to talk more about those first and then go into kombucha?
Maybe we'll have a little more talking at the beginning, and then we can get into some of the fun, exciting chopping for the kimchi towards the end.
Okay. So yeah, our demo today is going to be kimchi. That was one of my like first introductions to actually making my own fermented foods, and it's like a super duper easy process, and it's a great way to use produce that you have that maybe isn't looking super amazing anymore, but is still perfectly fine to eat. This is a great way to transform it into something new. And so, yeah, that's going to be our little demo. But first, I guess I'll talk a little bit more about the other ones.
Yeah.
Okay, going back to the kombucha. So if nobody knows what a kombucha is, it is kind of like a carbonated beverage, and it has live cultures in it. So it has that good bacteria in it, and the process also carbonates it. So that's what gives it like the soda, the spritzy soda feeling to it. But basically what it is generally you make it with black tea, because the SCOBY needs caffeine to digest that. And so it's kind of like a two-part process. So first you would take your SCOBY, and SCOBY stands for a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast. So that's kind of what makes up this nice, you would call this a mother. This is a mother SCOBY because you would use this to inoculate your tea first. So you would take the SCOBY, you would make a black tea concentrate, and then you would dissolve some sugar in that, and then you would let it cool. You would kind of dilute that concentrate to whatever container that you're using. And so we usually use this big jar, like a big glass jar for it that this will fit into easily. And then with your black tea, your sweetened strong black tea solution, you'd put in your SCOBY, and that's all you do for the first step. You cover it with a towel, you'd let it sit in a nice warm place, and you let the SCOBY start to digest some of the sugars that you put in. So when you're making kombucha, a lot of times it seems like you're adding a lot of sugar, and you're going to end up with this like really heavily like white sugar based drink, but actually the SCOBY digests most of that sugar and turns it into like that carbonated drink that you end up with. So it's just food for the kombucha, or for the SCOBY, but you kind of end up with like a less sweet product. And it's a great alternative to like artificially sweetened sodas. It's a lot healthier for you. So then once you would let that solution sit for about a week and let the SCOBY digest those sugars, then you would do the second step of the fermentation for the kombucha. You'd take your SCOBY out, you'd start a new batch of that black tea and sugar solution, and then you would take the black tea that you had fermented with the SCOBY, and then you could add whatever you wanted to flavor your kombucha with. So generally people use fruits and other things with natural sugars in them for the SCOBY or for the kombucha to digest, and that's the point that it would become carbonated. And so in the second stage of that process, I usually use a jar like this that has this nice rubber sealer on the top that kind of helps relieve some of the pressure of the carbonation stage. And also one like this with a wide rim, it lets you put in like a fruit puree without it getting stuck in your bottles. So I guess we actually kind of do like a 3-stage ferment just to prevent the fruit from getting stuck in the bottles like this that we would end up putting it in at the end. So at this stage, with the tea that's already been inoculated with the SCOBY, you'd put it in here, you'd add your fruits and whatever other flavorings. You can add herbs. Some of my favorites that I've done have been like a cranberry juniper. So it's a great way to use seasonal ingredients like that too. Like we have a lot of juniper trees outside and it adds really good flavor. And juniper also has medicinal benefits to it. So that's a great one. And you can do basil, you can do citrus, you can do all kinds of different things, whatever flavors you like. And you'd add it here. And then that process takes about a week as well. So as it ferments in the second stage, you can do what's called burping it. So the carbonation will start to build in here, and you want to come in like every day or two and just pop this lid and let some of the pressure out, and then close it back up, because you want that to be closed to create the environment for the carbonation to build, but you also don't want it to explode. So that's really important. And then once it's kind of at the point in this bottle that we want it to be at, and it's like really super nicely infused with those flavorings of whatever you added in the second stage, then you can filter that out and put it into this type of bottle. And this type of bottle also helps to finish out the carbonation process. So if it's still a little bit overly sweet, then you can put it in one of these and still leave it out to continue to ferment and to digest more of the sugars. And this also has a rubber top that helps with not exploding. And then you can come in and burp these as well. And then once it's at the point where it's not too sweet, most of the sugar's been digested, but the flavor is still good of whatever you infuse during the second stage of the fermentation, then you can just put these in the fridge. And putting fermented foods, things that you're fermenting, into the fridge really slows down the digestion of the sugars and like the building up of the carbonation, or the gases that build up during the fermentation process. So then that kind of like preserves it at the point of fermentation that you want it to. So whenever whenever our kombucha is at the point where we really like the flavor and the sweetness level and the carbonation level, we put these in the fridge, and then you can just enjoy it from there.
I don't know if you said, but so if you did, I apologize. But where do you get like things like that?
Bottles like
this? Like a store, or do you go online, or like where do you like to look for those kind of things?
I know that you can reliably get them from like brewing companies, because they're also used like for people that make their own beer. But a lot of times you can even just find drinks in the store that are sold in this type of bottle. Like I know we don't have a Trader Joe's around here, but they sell a ginger beer in these kinds of bottles. And so some of the ones we have are just saved from drinks that we've bought that have come in this type of bottle. But you can also purchase them from brewing supply companies. And you can also get other kind of fancier equipment from brewing companies to do kombucha that can help you with the process. Like there's a tool called an airlock that helps with allowing the carbonation to build up without exploding your vessel. And you don't have to remember to burp it as much with that, because airlocks, what they do is they let air out of the bottle, but they keep air from coming back in. So it wouldn't get what would you say? It wouldn't get contaminated with like some, bad bacteria that might be floating around in the air because it would still be sealed, but an airlock, it's like this little piece that goes into a cork. You'd have a cork with a hole in it, and then the airlock would fit into that, and that would allow the pressure to be released without having to burp your bottle. So there's some tools, and they're actually really cheap online. So fermentation. Another thing I like about fermentation is you can kind of do it with whatever kind of simple things that you have around your house already. Like you don't generally need super fancy equipment to do it. You can go that route. There are fancy like crocks and like ceramic things and whatnot that people use, but I just use like glass. Like I think these have come from like thrift shops and like acquired cheaply or for free. So
Nice.
yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah. So that's kind of a kombucha rundown.
Okay, so like now that we've thought about like this feeding a beverage,
Yeah.
maybe so like what's the difference between like a kombucha and like the ginger bug feeding? Like how does maybe?
Yeah, I'm not as experienced with ginger bugs, but I do know how it works. So with a ginger bug, it's just grated ginger and then sugar and water. And then I think that like the sugary environment also helps with the bad bacteria maybe not being in there. I don't know as much about that as I do about like brines and vegetable, like salty vegetable fermentation environments. But with a ginger bug, this is called a ginger bug because um it's grated ginger and sugar and water that you let sit out and ferment and bring in good bacteria and yeast from the environment. And then you would use this to add a little bit of this fermented ginger bug to a bigger amount of grated ginger and sugar and water if you're going to actually brew the drink itself. And for that, I don't think you need as much. It seems like a shorter process than kombucha, and it's something that, you don't have to get a SCOBY. SCOBYs you have to get from another like existing kombucha SCOBY. So like you can get it from a friend that makes kombucha, or I've heard of people buying kombucha from the store, like a regular little bottle of it, and letting it sit on the counter until like the mother SCOBY film kind of like grows on the top of it because the live cultures are active in there. And so it would actually, after some time, create its own little SCOBY. So I've heard of people getting a SCOBY that way, but I've always gotten them from friends who brewed kombucha on their own. So
So if you want a little bit of, homemade soda, good for the body, not so sugary, but like you got some options. So
yeah, because the more carbonated it is, that means that more of the sugars have been digested, and so there's really not as much like sugar content in a homemade like ginger beer, which is just like a ginger soda, or a kombucha than there is in like a Coca-Cola you would buy from the store. And it has those active live good cultures bacteria that's good for your belly too. So
not to get really into the weeds, but so fermentation is like processing of complex carbohydrates, one of which is sugar. So it turns this C6H12O6 and breaks it down into things like CO2, which is the part that makes it carbonated. So it like is like a chemical process. If you like ever talk about like the physical chemical type process in school, like that's what it is. So it is just kind of like poof, it like breaks apart to the different carbon and oxygen and it yeah. So yeah.
So those are our beverages, our fermented beverages. And then the other one we're going to talk about before going into kimchi is the sourdough, which I already started talking about a little bit. But so again, with like the sourdough, you can get a starter from somebody, which is what I did, just because like I knew it was a good starter and that it had made many a delicious loaf of bread in the past. But you can also, and I have done this at home, you can make your own sourdough starter. And all you have to do to make that is just mix some flour and water and let that sit on your counter until it gets bubbly. You just want to keep it covered, obviously, like from flies and stuff, but you can make your own that way. And that's super easy. It takes about a week before it'll start getting bubbly, depending on the temperature. The warmer the temperature is out, the faster the fermentation process happens. So, for example, if you're fermenting in the winter and your house is a little chillier, all of the fermentation times would just take a few extra days versus if you're doing it in the summertime or if your house is warmer. So, and we were just reading about ginger beer, and one of the things that the book mentioned was that you can actually take your ginger beer or your ginger bug starter like this, and it has all the good like yeast and stuff in it. And you can actually use that to speed up your production of a sourdough starter. So you can kind of like cross pollinate your fermentation projects to spread the good bacteria and yeast love around. Yeah. Oh, so this is my like trusty fermentation book that I've had for years. And it's an old version. There's been newer editions of this book that have come out. It's by Sandor Katz. He's based out of Tennessee. But he is like just the master of fermentation. And it's called wild fermentation because that means like it's all pulling the good yeast and bacteria that you need like from the food and from the environment, like from the the raw materials that you're using, the produce or whatever, and the environment rather than adding like pre-made cultures. Like you can buy cultures from the store at like I don't know, like health food stores and stuff, but you don't need to. And that's why this is like wild fermentation. It's like kind of all DIY at home stuff. And I love this book. And I got it used online for like $10. So great.
So if you like reading but you love watching videos and you wanted to hear more about fermentation, who would since Hollis and I lived together, we've watched a fair number of these episodes, so I don't feel so bad about the leading question, but tell us, who should I go to watch some fermentation videos?
My favorite YouTube fermentation resource is Brad Leone from Bon Appetit. He has a series called It's Alive, and it's called It's Alive because it's all about fermented foods being alive with good bacteria and yeast. And so, yeah, he has a lot of great videos. He has some like very awesome creative ones. He has some of, just your basic kimchi, the way that he does it. He has a kombucha one. And so, yeah, he's awesome. He's hilarious and very fun to watch. So I would highly suggest It's Alive. Yeah. Yeah.
As a side note, if you do end up starting your starter, a couple of things. One, you should start one or get one because next week we're going to be doing some sourdough pizza. It'll be delicious.
Yes.
It'll use most of the pieces from these cooking classes. So it's like a nice, informal pizza party for finishing the series with us. But also, it's like a great way to use starter. But if you don't want to make pizza crust, but if you do start a sourdough starter and have extra, you can make things like sourdough pancakes where it's just like the discard, or biscuits, or other, like what else would you use a sourdough starter for besides like a sourdough loaf of bread?
Yeah, pancakes, biscuits, waffles, pizza dough. I mean, you can literally just take your sourdough starter and just like throw it in a pan and like cook it up and like not even put anything else in there, and like it's like a little sour flat pancake thing. It's really it's so easy. And that brings me to a good point that I didn't say about the sourdough is that if you have your sourdough at room temperature all the time, so if you're like actively like making sourdough bread all the time or sourdough pancakes or whatever, then you're gonna end up with a lot of extra discard starter because you have to kind of get rid of some of the old starter when you feed it. And so like feeding it is when you just add more flour and water every day so that the yeasts in there have something to digest. But so you would end up with a lot of extra, and there's a lot of different ways to use that up so it doesn't go to waste either. We are currently keeping our sourdough starter in the fridge just because we haven't been baking as much lately. Most of our activity has been outside in the garden and whatnot, and our kitchen projects kind of slowed down this summer, but they tend to pick up in the winter when we're inside more. But yeah, so you can keep it in the fridge and then you just feed it once a week rather than every day. If you have it out on the counter at room temperature, it needs to be fed every day to stay fresh. But yeah, if you keep it in the fridge, you can just feed it once a week, and then when you're ready to bake something, then you would take it out a day or two before, discard some, feed it a little bit so it's fresh, and then use it from there. So once it's nice and active and bubbly.
Yeah, that sounds tasty. It has me kind of feeling hungry though. So speaking of fermented food, last but not least, kimchi.
Yes, some kimchi. Kimchi is one of my favorite favorite foods. And I feel like my kimchis end up actually being more of like a crouchy because like classic kimchi, like traditional kimchi would be with a specific kind of cabbage called Napa cabbage, and then I think also daikon radish. I think that's like the basic, traditional ingredients that you would use, but a lot of times I just use like your regular head cabbage, like that you would see like in pretty much any grocery store, and that's kind of more of a sauerkraut vibe. So actually, our kimchi ends up being kind of like a mishmash of those two things, but they're both like fermented cabbage um, deals, so very similar. But I think the salting process is different between the two. But today we're going to talk about the process of making kimchi because that's the process that I actually use. I just use sauerkraut ingredients sometimes. So, yeah.
And if you need any more of a reason to make it, I saw they had heads of cabbage on sale for 49 cents at Trail Creek today, so check it out. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Super inexpensive and really delicious.
Yeah. And another cool thing that I really like about making kimchi is that you can get that head of cabbage at the store, and then, if you don't have time to make kimchi that specific week, like cabbage stays good in the fridge for a while, and also like even if the outside leaves start looking a little bit sketchy, you can just peel them off and like the inside will be just fine. Like this one, I've honestly, I don't remember when I got this one, and it's like perfectly fine. I just like pulled off the outer leaves and so yeah. Cool. Should we start making our kimchi?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool.
I'm excited.
All right. So we're going to talk about 3 different stages of kimchi today. Because your basic process is kind of a 2-day process. But it's like very short periods of time that you have to do each day. And then it's kind of like a little daily maintenance for about a week until it's ready to be like finished fermenting and go in the fridge. Which sounds like a lot of time, but it's really not too much overall time commitment. So the first stage is the brining stage. And the brining stage, brine is just salt water. That's all it is. It's just salt water. And so, yeah, in the first stage, what you do is you chop up your cabbage. Chop it up. Hey everyone.
That my last Sunday, so I was like, I think someone commented something, but nice to see y'all again. Thanks for joining.
So,
Is there like a special way to be chopping the cabbage, Hollis, or can you chop it any which way, or?
I kind of just rough chop it, no big deal. I kind of cut out, so this is the core. I don't know if you guys can see, but this is the core. And you don't necessarily want that. It's kind of a big chunk that's not as fun to eat. So I just kind of wedge that out. This is kind of what it looks like when you have a half cabbage, what the core looks like. And I just kind of, do like a rough chop like this. And out of space. And then I'll just kind of chop it this way too, so it's not too big of pieces.
Kind of like your choice on how big the chunks are?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
I think with like traditional kimchi, if you're using Napa cabbage, there's a more specific way to kind of get it to be, a more traditional end product if you're looking for that, but it's not going to make or break your kimchi. So then I just take a big glass jar like this, and I just start throwing my cabbage in there. And then this is also when you would cut up anything else that you want to put into your vegetable ferment. So I think we're going to do some radishes and some carrots.
I think so.
Add some good variety, some good different textures. I love radishes in my kimchi. They have that little spiciness, that little bite. And it's like a different kind of spicy kick than like the seasonings that we're gonna add, or the flavor palette that we're gonna add to this. So dropping some cabbage on the floor, but our kitchen helper is taking care of that. She is on it today. Yep. All right. So there's our cabbage.
Sorry, I'm
You're
too
good.
excited.
Yeah, good. All right. So you're gonna want kind of a nice big jar for this. And then the other thing, so like I said, like you don't need very specific kitchen equipment to do this, but what you do need is like a glass jar that fits inside of your big jar that's not going to get stuck in there. Because one key part about fermenting vegetables is that you want to keep them submerged in your liquid, so in your brine. You don't want them sticking up out of the surface because that's when they're going to be exposed to the air that might potentially contain some bad bacteria. So you want to keep as much as you can your veggies below the surface of your brine. So now I'm just doing some radishes.
They're kind of submerged too. You can always use your hands as long as they're clean, like wash them with soap and water, saying yourself happy birthday a few times, that kind of clean, and like use your fingers to
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. And another thing on that is that I always just use my hands, like clean hands. You definitely want to wash your hands immediately before touching anything inside your fermentation because you could potentially introduce bad bacteria or other yucky things that you don't want to be in there. But another thing that you might want to keep in mind when you're doing that is that, and we'll talk about this more a little bit later, but if you make your kimchi spicy, then putting your hands in there is sometimes a little bit dangerous. I have had many a jalapeno eyeball incident because I wear contacts, and so I tend to do this with my bare hands and then regret it later. But some people wear gloves, or you can just use some sort of kitchen utensil rather than handling your kimchi directly at that point in time. But yeah, so I'm chopping up the radishes. I'm gonna chop up the carrots.
Tiger hands next time,
Your tiger hands?
Yes, you're not using your bare hands.
What do you mean tiger hands?
So like lions, tigers, and bears. If you're using your bare hands,
Oh,
you use your tiger hands. So
that one flew straight over my head. Somebody out there was like, "Wow."
I was like gonna say lion hands, but I was like, oh, that could also be like a non-true thing, hands, and I don't know if that's the case.
Lion hands.
Yeah. Kitchen helper also did not laugh at my joke, but it's okay.
She's very intense on. Anytime there's chopping going on, she knows that we're not the most precise cooks, and so often things go flying. Right.
Having a fun time chopping, that's all.
Yeah.
So I've heard you can also like lacto ferment carrots, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Do you like is it just the same process? Yeah.
I've been meaning to look that up. I mean, I always put carrots into my kimchi, and it works fine. But I do remember reading on a fermentation blog that if you're gonna be fermenting just carrots, that there's another process that the process might be a little bit different. But I don't actually. I haven't. I always forget to look that up. But I've never had an issue with just throwing it in my normal brine with my cabbage. So maybe today. You know if there's a different process?
I read about it once.
Yeah.
But I've not done my due diligence on the lacto fermented carrot front. But
yeah. When I first learned about fermentation in a workshop, that particular teacher did not say specifically that you had to do anything different. So, and very much encourage fermenting any and all vegetables. And so that's kind of the route that I took. But if y'all want to do some research on lacto fermenting, specifically carrots, then let us know.
anything at all, send us a picture, tweet us, TikTok video it, let us know. We would love to see it.
All right, so the next step of this brining process is to make your brine. But that is okay. Okay, let's see. We're gonna use this one. We might have to do a few rounds of it, but I'm trying to remember the ratio.
I think it's a tablespoon of salt to a cup of water.
Okay, yeah, that sounds right. Okay, tablespoon of salt to a cup of water, and we have this salt. I don't believe it really matters what kind of salt you use.
Can it have iodine in it though?
I don't remember if that's a thing that you need to be careful of. Is it? Did you read that?
I haven't read it today. I feel like I heard that somewhere at one point, but hearsay is hearsay, so hard to. Don't quote me on it.
I would just go for non-iodized, if you have the option. All right. So that's 1 tablespoon of salt to 1 cup of water. And so I'm just going to do this ratio and pour it into my big jar of veggies until the veggies are submerged. So just make sure it dissolves before you pour it in as much as possible.
Kind of larger vessel.
Okay, so that was about maybe a quarter or a fifth of the way up. So I'm gonna do 4 tablespoons and then 4 cups of water and see if that does it. 1, 2. That's usually the amount that I start with when I do an amount like this. 4. And this seems like a lot of salt, but you're actually going to dispose of most of this brine. So.
Little sneak peek. If you read the recipe, you'll taste it tomorrow. If it's too salty, you can rinse it off. And if it's not salty enough, you can still add more salt.
Yeah. So that's that's a fun thing about fermentation too, is that it's a process. So, you can you have a lot of opportunity to like taste test it along the way and adjust it to how you like it. So that's a fun part of it too. And it should taste like very salty. Like if I tasted this water right now, it would taste very salty. And that's kind of what you want for this first stage. So. Pouring it. All right, I might need 1 more cup. So.
Getting close though.
It's almost up there, and actually, no, I don't. So, and don't worry, I washed my hands before I did this, but yeah. So as long as you can push your veggies down below the surface, then you are good to go. So that's pretty much it for the first step. The only other thing we need is a jar that will fit in here to crush down our veggies. You want like a glass jar, that's not gonna fit. there we go. So, I know that there's veggies floating on the surface here, but that is okay. As long as they're mostly submerged, it'll be just fine. And then a lot of times I add a weight to that too. Nope. Trial and error, folks.
Aha, here we go, Holland.
You got it? Oh yeah. So I have this miniature mortar and pestle thing. Oh, this isn't the jar I usually use. So I have a jar that usually fits perfectly inside of. But yeah, usually I use something like this to just kind of give it a little extra pressure to keep the veggies submerged. And then that is your first step. So this is all you would do on the first day of making kimchi.
Okay, that took like 10 minutes or what?
Yeah, it takes like, the biggest process is just the chopping. So yeah, there we go. And I usually just cover that with a towel and let it sit.
Nice little art piece, except for it's covered, so you're not looking at it. But you know,
it is pretty
looks
with
cool.
the layers. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So then the next day you come back and ta-da! You'd have something like this. Cool. And this is when you get to get creative with your flavorings. So that's fun. Do you want to leave this part?
Sure.
Okay.
So what you're gonna do is you're gonna make your spice paste. So you kind of get to pick and choose. The recipe we shared suggests using some hot chilies. If you really don't do spicy stuff, that's okay. But what you should really, really add is some, garlic, some onion, power couple right here, but also ginger because it's delicious. So I think it said to cut up like an inch or so, but a couple of cloves of garlic, like 3 to 4 or more, like an inch or more, however much you're adding of garlic, and then an onion. And so we'll chop these puppies up. We'll put them in our handy dandy food processor, and we'll add some chilies because we like a little bit of spicy zing in this household.
And kimchi can actually absorb a lot of spice. So I've actually made kimchis where I added a lot of hot peppers to it, and it didn't even end up that spicy.
Oh, really? That's cool.
Yeah. So don't be afraid to add a little bit more than maybe you think you can handle, because during the fermentation process, that spice often mellows out a little bit. So
nice. I was reading that you can even use dried, but that the important thing is that you don't use anything with chemicals in it. Is that right?
yeah, I wouldn't add anything with preservatives because that's really gonna affect your good bacteria. So
okay, nice. Golly. Peel the layers of the onion here, getting the papery part off. They're all really attached, so it's taking a hot second, but that is okay. If you've stuck with us, I didn't do it today, but I'm thinking about it now. If you don't like crying when you chop onions, stick them in the fridge for an hour or two first, and it keeps it from splashing up, I guess. I don't exactly know. Something my mom does. It works really well. Would recommend it. It is nice. Keep your eyeballs, go through some fancy free, all the good things.
where did you get that phrase from?
I feel like it's like one of those like common phrases that like it just kind of grew up with. Like
Really?
Mhm.
Footloose and fancy free.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was like just my parents. Maybe it's a regional thing. I feel like I've heard it in pop culture too, but like, who's to say? You know, that's kind of the cool part about like, you know, becoming a bigger kid and meeting other people who lived in different places. Is phrases I heard growing up, maybe Hollis didn't hear, and vice versa. Do you have any fun phrases that are unique to your parents or your grown up? You're like funny
I don't
idioms.
know. I don't know. I can't think of anything. Well, I know that whenever, I don't know, is that even a phrase? Whenever my dad wanted to tell us what we were having for dinner and make us think that it was going to be something gross, he would tell us we were having rutabaga for dinner. So I always thought rutabagas were bad and like not tasty, but I've had them as an adult, and they're actually really good. But whenever we're like, "What's for dinner?" He'd be like, "Rutabagas," and we'd all go, "Ew."
Funny.
Or like, "What am I, chopped liver?" That's definitely one. But I feel like more people say that.
True.
So I don't know. Think of it off the top of my head.
Got some onions. We're gonna get some garlic, some ginger, and a little bit of hot chilies. But I was not to be a big nerd, but to be a little bit nerdy. I was reading that because rutabagas were predominantly used for critters during World War II in France, that lots of older folks who are French do not like rutabagas because they were a symbol of hard times.
Oh.
So it was an interesting. It was an article about the rutabaga coming back in French cuisine, and I love the word rutabaga, so I had to read it because I really like the word rutabaga. But
Pretty tasty though.
yeah, it's like interesting to hear about people's relations to food.
Yeah. They're kind of potatoey, but with like a different flavor profile, and like they're pretty good roasted like potatoes too. They have that like starchiness. Good in soups too.
Soups. What would you put with a rutabaga in a soup?
I know I put rutabaga in soup, but like I can't think of like what else was in it. I don't know. Carrots.
It's like a good
celery.
veggie thing.
Yeah, I think it's
okay.
like any soup that you would like put potatoes in, I bet you could just like sub in rutabaga or I don't know. Yeah.
Nice.
Maybe a sausage kale soup would be good with some rutabaga.
That sounds good right about now.
Almost soup season.
Woohoo! Also, if you too have an abundance of tomatoes, it can definitely be gazpacho season.
Yeah, it's already soup season. Oh, I haven't even made it gazpacho. Love it. If you don't know what gazpacho is, because I hadn't really had it until a couple years ago. It's like a cold tomato soup, and some people add like cucumber to it too, and like sometimes it's spicy, sometimes it's not. But it's like kind of just like a blended cold tomato soup. Pretty tasty.
That does sound yummy. I wonder if it also goes well with grilled cheese.
Maybe.
I don't know that I've actually ever eaten gazpacho. I just think
Really?
it's yeah.
You should make it.
We should.
It's really easy too.
I don't know that I necessarily grew up in a cold soup household, but I respect and appreciate it.
What was one of the top soups that you guys ate when you were a kid?
I don't even know that we ate that much soup. My mom is a stew person. I feel like it was big, like a stew, but now she makes like chicken and noodle, but it's more like a stew because there's not quite as much liquid to it, and it's hot stuff. Oh man, it's tasty and it, yummy, delicious, and warm. But did you have any top soups growing up, Hollis?
My mom always makes bean soup around Christmas time, and that's really good. And we have it with like a homemade wheat bread, like a hearty wheat bread, like fresh out of the oven or the bread maker, and then like I always remember eating it with summer sausage, which is like weird because like it was always a winter thing for me. But I guess I mean summer sausage you can eat all year. It's like a cured meat, right? So,
yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, we would always have like summer sausage and bean soup around Christmas time. And then I remember eating a lot of broccoli soup, which you would think that like kids wouldn't love, but I loved it. I thought it was so good. So
shout out to parents getting their kids on those veggies. Yeah, I was gonna say, and Steve, we appreciate you being a top fan. So also happy belated birthday. But
it was my dad's birthday this week, and he is a top fan on our Facebook page. So shout out Steve. Yeah, Steven, watch our cooking class.
I appreciate it.
I found out recently they watch it sometimes on like their TV. They like stream it to the TV, which is like kind of intimidating to me. I'm like, I don't know if this show was meant to be watched on such a large screen. But I appreciate it anyways.
Yeah.
If you're streaming our show on your big screen TV or any sort of TV, let us know because that's awesome. Should we add some hot peppers?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, do we have some options here? What you feeling today, Hollis?
We should add some red ones. I always hear that like red, yeah, like red chili peppers is like kind of a classic kimchi thing.
Okay.
We could also throw in a jalapeno. Or
I think it might be
Serrano. A Serrano.
I
do that.
pulled our other roommate out of curiosity, you know, like a little bit of like brainstorming with the peeps, and she was also like, you know, you can, you know, add whatever kind of hot peppers you want. If you're not making a traditional kimchi, what's your oyster, man? I might get a little knife for these ones. So I don't know that I'm quite that skilled with my knife picking, cutting, but you know, everybody has their own talents. Using big knives is not mine, but I can work with small ones, so that's nice.
Hit us with some questions, folks, if you've got anything about fermentation, anything about food in general. It is user's choice. Yeah, depending on how hot you want it.
Oh golly.
So it just got kind of sprayed with hot pepper seeds just now. I'm able to see that.
Hot pepper seeds to the overalls.
And you got 2 layers of protection.
Yeah, for real. And I'm gonna make sure to wash my hands really good after, because I rub my eyes way too much.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but that don't always do it. So, if anybody's out there using habaneros for this, maybe consider using gloves. Yeah. And then to blend this, so you might be thinking this looks like a little bit of a dry mixture to blend. We're gonna be filtering out our veggies that have been sitting in the brine. And so you just use a strainer, just pour it over that, but keep the brine for now until you finish with this whole day 2 process, because you might need a little bit. You might need to add a little bit to keep the veggies submerged. But the idea is that the veggies will be kind of salted enough that when you add them back to your jar after straining them and mix them with the paste, that there will be enough like natural liquids coming out of them, because salt, when you add salt to outside of a vegetable, the veggie wants to or the cells, the plant cells want to balance out the amount of salt that's on the outside and on the inside, and through osmosis, I think. Is that right? I don't know.
That is.
You would never know that I was a science major in school because I'm terrible about terminologies. But basically, the plant cells will want to balance out the amount of salt that's on the outside and the inside, and so a lot of the internal liquid of the vegetable will actually come out of that, and so it'll the salt will draw out that liquid, and so the veggies that we've soaked in the salt water will actually kind of produce their own liquid to ferment themselves in. And that's why you don't need all of the brine after the first day. That's just to get them nice and salted.
Nice.
So,
okay.
Should we filter it out?
Yeah, let's do it. Gonna take out our handy dandy weighing glass.
So we've got our nice sieve, or you can use a colander or whatever you got. Place that on a bowl. Pour. Whew, sorry, folks, that was loud. Okay, so all of the brine is out, so this is fine to leave in there. And I'm just gonna take these veggies. I'm gonna put them back into my jar. And it's good to use kind of like a wide mouth jar for this, so that you can have some room to work with, have some room for your weight to go in there. your, yeah, whatever glass you use to weigh down the veggies. And then, there we go. So here are our veggies that have been salted. And then use a little bit of this brine that we just filtered out. I'm just going to splash just a little bit into our onion, garlic, ginger, pepper mixture.
Nice.
And we're going to blend that up. So this right now.
Yeah. Like that too. Yeah. Like I took it out. So I'm
Oh, right here.
I was like, I know it's here. Oh man. What do you think? Okay. Solid. Ooh, that smells so fresh. Yum. Yeah, kind of. I feel like it's like ginger, a little bit of spice.
Salt and gingery.
Yeah.
Umami ordeal. So now, yeah, it's like kind of a pasty thing. Thick mixture.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna get this into here.
Do you want to use like a little bit, all of it? What you feeling?
A bit all of it.
Okay.
Scoop that in.
Listening to Hollis's words here, so like I can see there's some here. Don't quite got good specs on the angle here, so.
All right, so we've got our paste in here with our veggies, and we're just gonna mix it up. A lot of times I do this part with my hands just because I like to get it nice and mixed. But this jar, the top of it's a little bit smaller than the jar I usually use for kimchi, so use a wooden spoon. And again, be cognizant of your hot peppers when you're doing that. All right, so now this is what it looks like. Nice mixed up veggie paste mixture. This is a smaller batch than I would usually do, but we're just demoing, so. All right, and then what you want to do is you want to start pressing it down. Okay, I guess I will use my hands for this part. This is kind of hard to do with a tool. You want to pack it down into the bottom of this jar as much as you possibly can, because that will, keep there from being air pockets in there, and air is kind of the enemy of fermentation. Or like, external air. Air bubbles will come up in there, but we don't want the environment, the air to be touching it. So pack it down into the bottom of your jar. If you can see, oh, you can't really see that. You'll see this amount of liquid that's kind of coming up, and that is I didn't pour that much liquid into our paste. It's mostly liquid that is actually coming out of the veggies. Like I said, with like the salt encouraging that liquid to be coming out. And so I've packed it down pretty good, but there's not really a good layer of liquid on top. And we want there to be a protective layer of salt water on top to keep, any bad bacteria in the air from touching it. And so this is where you would come and you take your extra brine and you would just pour some in there until it's kind of covered. I wouldn't add too much. But there you go. And then just add our weight back on there. Oh, that doesn't fit all the way down in the jar. Okay, that doesn't really do a whole lot. Usually you want your weight to kind of help raise the water level or the brine level. But honestly, I don't even know if we need any for this small of a batch. So I might just leave it how it is. There's enough liquid on top to ensure that the veggies aren't going to come into contact with any bad bacteria. But when you do it like this, without any special, you know, fermentation crocks is what they call them. Like these like like ceramic jars that have a weight that fits in there perfectly to like achieve this process, then you actually want to come in every day while it's fermenting and just like push the veggies below the surface. So at least if there's one that was at the surface touching air one day, then the next day it'll be submerged. So as long as you come in every day and kind of push the veggies down below the surface, then you should be good. And the more they ferment, the more liquid that is going to come out of the veggies as well and kind of help with that process. So over time, you'll see the water level rise. I probably added a little bit more brine than I needed to, but that's okay. So then you just, I guess we usually do it open. We usually just put a towel over this and let it ferment that way. Or you can just kind of like let the lid sit on there, but maybe not close it all the way. But yeah. And then this would ferment for about a week. So every day for a week, come in, push your veggies below the surface of the brine, and then, you know, do little taste tests every day. See how fermented, you know, experience like the changing in the flavor and the texture of the veggies as it ferments. And then, you know, about a week or so, whenever you like how it is, you know, you like the amount that it's fermented and the taste and the flavors and the texture, because veggies will kind of start to soften up. And so if you ferment it too long, they'll be kind of like squishier, but I don't know. I feel like you have to ferment it for a while for that to happen. But yeah, so just push it below the surface every day for a week, and then you could actually just transfer this to jars like this and close them up, and then put this in the fridge, and then it'll be ready for you to eat whenever. So yeah, that's kind of the kimchi process.
I think so. And I think that's the last that we got for you on today's fun fermenting food cooking class. Oh, sorry, it's like I can't tell where the camera is. Don't worry, Jill. But at any rate, thanks for joining us. Thanks for sharing your fermentation knowledge, Hollis. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
And make sure to tune in next week when you make some pizza, because it's going to be delicious and nutritious. So please come join us. And if you haven't done it yet and you would like, you too can be the proud earner of 15 whole new dollars. You fill out the survey we're going to post in the comments for the Wunschwei Wawasake series. Yeah, so make sure to fill it out, and you too could be the winner of $15, which is great. So please fill it out and stay tuned for next week at 5:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, because we'll be here.
Yeah.
So
this was our last week of this series for that series, but then we'll still be continuing to do our normal cooking class, and we're really excited about next week because we're going to kind of combine a lot of the different topics and the foods and the little, you know, techniques and methods of cooking and processing food that we've used over the past previous 4 weeks and today, and combine them all into a really delicious pizza, sourdough pizza. So I'm excited. It's going to be tasty.
It'll be good. So make sure to join us next week. And until then, have a good weekend, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.